A large convoy of fuel trucks of the Russian military can be seen completely destroyed by the Ukrainian armed forces near Pryluki, Chernihiv region. The tensions between Russia and Ukraine is heightened as the war has entered the 12th day after Russia invaded Ukraine. Missiles and rockets are being fired in the Ukrainian military and residents are resisting the Russian troops. As per the latest visuals accessed by Republic Media Network, a large convoy of fuel trucks of the Russian military can be seen completely destroyed by the Ukrainian armed forces near Pryluki, Chernihiv region. The video shows that Russia's fuel trucks can be seen lying on the snow-covered roads. Several trucks are destroyed and a few of them have fallen on the ground. The Russian troops are invading Ukraine from at least 3 sides. They have been launching missile attacks on residential and administrative buildings as well. According to the latest report by the United Nations Human Rights Office, 801 civilians have been wounded until Sunday midnight. UNHCR says more than 1.7 million civilians flee Ukraine. And as per the data released by the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, 1,735,068 people have fled Ukraine and moved to other countries since Russia launched an attack on Ukraine on February 24. Around 1,027,603 people have arrived in Poland after the Russian offensive in Ukraine. Around 180,163 people have fled Ukraine and sought refuge in Hungary. Furthermore, Moldova received 82,762 refugees, Romania 78,977 people from Ukraine. 128,169 people from Ukraine had reached Slovakia and 183,688 Ukrainians have moved to other European countries ever since Russia's military operation in Ukraine. Russia-Ukraine war. On the 12th day of its invasion, Russia announced yet another ceasefire and humanitarian corridors to permit civilians to flee war-torn Ukraine. However, the Russian armed forces continued to invade Ukrainian cities, reported AP. The recent announcement from the Russian side came after 2 failed previous ceasefire attempts. Russian Defense Ministry announced that civilians would be allowed to leave Kyiv, Mariupol and Kharkiv and Sumy. In a statement released on Facebook, the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry blamed Russia of interrupting the opening of humanitarian corridors of the evacuations of civilians. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry insisted that Russian troops continued to attack Kyiv, Kharkiv, Mariupol, Sumy, Mykolaiv, Volnovas and other places which made it impossible for people to evacuate the places. On the other hand, the third round of talks between the delegations of Russia and Ukraine have started. The meeting comes as an attempt to reach an agreement on a ceasefire and a safe passage corridor for people. Fueling no one. Desperate Putin trying to conceal fuel trucks as regular support vehicles as Ukrainian forces continue to hammer his beleaguered supply lines. While Russian leader steps up attacks on civilians in bid to break morale, a desperate Vladimir Putin is trying to conceal fuel trucks as regular support vehicles as Ukrainian forces continue to hammer his beleaguered support lines, while the Russian president has also stepped up attacks on civilians in a bid to break morale. Supply issues and logistical problems have been plaguing Russian advances for a number of days as Ukrainian forces continue to put up stiff resistance and hold key cities. It has defied Putin's plans for a swift and crushing victory that would not require significant supply lines or reinforcements. A huge Russian military convoy was pictured traveling towards the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv earlier this week, understood to extend for 40 miles, but has made no progress of note for at least 2 days due to fuel and food shortages. An aerial footage has now emerged of burning Russian vehicles and armored cars sat burning having been left abandoned after running out of fuel. Now Russia is trying to disguise its fuel trucks in order to minimize losses. Chief of Defense Staff Admiral Sir Tony Radakin said today that Russia is failing with basics in terms of the maintenance of its kit and its forces are becoming demoralized after suffering terrible losses. He told the BBC, "We don't have a complete picture but we do know about a series of factors. Russia hasn't operated at this scale since the Second World War. To do what is called combined arms maneuver is incredibly complex and incredibly difficult. We are seeing Russia failing to do that in a competent fashion. They were held up north of Kyiv and their forces started to become dislocated. then you have seen the failure of Russia with just some basics in terms of the maintenance of their kit. Their kit has been failing. At the same time, Russia has been attacked by Ukrainian armed forces, some of their logistics have been attacked, and now you are seeing that whole convoy stuck. That is impacting on morale. There are stories of the troops in those vehicles not wanting to stay in those vehicles, so they are camping in the forest, they are stuck there. Russia has got itself into a mess not just with that convoy, but with the whole of Ukraine. Some of the battalion tactical groups, those that have been leading the fight for Russia, have suffered terrible losses. We know that Russia has acknowledged it lost nearly 500 people. To put that into context, it is more than the UK lost in Afghanistan over 20 years. We know that some of the lead elements of Russian forces have been decimated by the Ukrainian response. It comes as dramatic footage emerged yesterday of the final moments of Russian attack helicopters shot down by Ukrainian soldiers over a rural village around 25 miles outside Kyiv, while evidence has also emerged to suggest that Russian jets have been downed near Chernihiv in northern Ukraine. However, there have also been warnings that the vulnerability of Russian jets and helicopters may lead Putin's commanders to further rely on artillery to bombard civilian infrastructure. This is likely to lead to further innocent lives being lost because artillery is less accurate than airstrikes. As the slow progress infuriates Putin, Moscow has been forced to deny it is targeting civilian areas. The City Council of Ukraine's Mariupol has said an evacuation of some of 400,000 residents trapped by encircling Russian forces would start at 12 p.m. today until 9 p.m. under a temporary ceasefire. It comes as residents are being forced to flee the nearby towns of Bucha and Irpin as they are pounded by airstrikes. But the latest agreement comes just a day after Russia's abandonment of a ceasefire as fleeing refugees were shelled as they tried to escape on Saturday. Some 200,000 civilians were set to leave the port city of Mariupol and 15,000 from Volnovakha in eastern Ukraine at 7 a.m. yesterday, UK time, as part of a temporary ceasefire deal overseen by the Red Cross. Under the agreement, the refugees had 5 hours to flee the cities and evacuate westwards along humanitarian corridors. But just 400 refugees managed to flee Volnovakha before the ceasefire was shattered. It is unclear how many, if any, families escaped Mariupol. Mariupol Deputy Mayor Serhiy Orlov said, "The Russians are continuing to bomb us and use artillery. It is crazy. There is no ceasefire in Mariupol and there is no ceasefire all along the route." This morning, the World Health Organization said Russia has carried out several attacks on Ukrainian healthcare. Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said today, WHO has confirmed several attacks on healthcare in Ukraine, causing multiple deaths and injuries. Additional reports are being investigated. Attacks on healthcare facilities are workers breach medical neutrality and are violations of international humanitarian law. Yesterday, heartbreaking pictures emerged of men, women and children hiding under a destroyed bridge to escape Russian airstrikes on Irpin, on the outskirts of Kyiv. Hundreds of residents sheltered in the darkness beneath the bridge which had been blown up by the Russians. They were forced to seek refuge there, even though the bridge could collapse, because Russian warplanes were circling overhead. The number of fleeing refugees is expected to reach 1.5 million on Sunday as the war reaches its 11th day. Ukrainian officials have said strong resistance continued in Ukraine's second-largest city Kharkiv overnight, while its forces were also conducting defensive operations in Donetsk and Chernihiv. But pictures released by the Russian Ministry of Defense on Saturday shows its soldiers had taken control of a Ukrainian military base near the village of Radensk area of the Kherson region, the first major city occupied by Russia since the invasion. T-64 and T-80 tanks, armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, and Ural vehicles were seen in the base. Dominic Raab said today that Putin's army leaders in Ukraine could join him in jail for war crimes if they follow illegal orders, as he warned the conflict could drag on for years. The deputy prime minister said economic sanctions had put the squeeze on the Russia leader, which was forcing him to use ever more brutal tactics to achieve a quick result. Britain has already called for Mr. Putin to face war crimes prosecution, with reports of illegal weapons like cluster bombs and possibly thermobaric weapons being used. Appearing on television this morning, Mr. Rob said Ukrainian forces have proved a far tougher prospect than Putin expected and that military commanders could also be prosecuted if they did not refuse orders. I think we ought to be under no doubt that our mission with our allies is to ensure Putin fails in Ukraine, and it's going to take some time, Mr. Rob said. We're talking about months, if not years, and therefore we will have to show some strategic stamina because this is not going to be over in a day.